My name is Andrés Oswill. I use he, they, our pronouns. I'm a strategic consultant for Oregon Futures Lab, C4 dedicated to recruiting, running, and retaining progressive BIPOC leadership in the state. I will also be speaking on tomorrow morning's panel and then the Oregon Donor Alliance's event tomorrow afternoon. So by this time tomorrow, you will be sick of me. My role tonight is to talk about what happened in Portland's recent elections. You heard about the charter reform changes, the reasons they were made, the hopes for the proportional representation, and the work spearheaded by the Coalition of Communities of Color. So I'm here tonight to answer who voted, who won, and were all of the hopes and dreams of the Charter Commission realized in 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to start at the end. Portland had a successful, free, and fair election that selected 3 councilors in each of the city council districts. Next slide. Together, Portlanders elected the most diverse city council in Portland's history by every metric. So I'm going to give a quick rundown. Yes, thank you. Applause. Nice. Okay. I'm going to give a quick rundown of some of the electeds. So in District 1, which is representing East Portland, we have Candace Avalos, who's here with us today. You'll hear more about Candace later, but she came from Verde, an environmental justice nonprofit, as well as serving on the Charter Commission. Another councillor in District 1 was Jamie Dunphy. He formerly worked for Commissioner Nick Fish, so he had experience in the building. He worked in government affairs for the Oregon Cancer Association and was really representing musicians in Portland's art scene. And then the third councillor in District 1 was Loretta Smith. She was a former 2-term county commissioner who ran again successfully to return to office, this time for Portland City Council. In District 2, which is north and northeast Portland, you had Dan Ryan, who was the only current city commissioner to run for re-election to City Council. He was elected, as well as Alana Prittle-Guinea, a longtime union employee who had her own consulting business and experience in Oregon state government. And then Samir Kanal, who was born and raised in North and Northeast Portland, who had worked for the city of Portland doing alternative responses to policing and oversight work for the city. So coming from the perspective of an employee working on alternative responses to safety. Then on the next slide, you'll see the councilors for District 3 and 4. District 3 was representing Southeast Portland. You had Angelita Murillo, a millennial who had a really big social media presence, progressive firebrand who had worked for former city commissioner Joanne Hardstein, Steve Novick, who was a former city councilor who ran, one of those crossover candidates who appealed to a wide swath of folks, and Tiffany Koyama Lane, a public schools teacher who had been involved with the teacher union, including the recent teacher strike. So those were the 3 for Southeast Portland. And then in District 4, you have Eric Zinderman. He had worked for the mayor as well as a county commissioner. So coming from a local government background, had run for a local office before. Mitch Green, a environmental economist who worked for public utility and was one of the candidates endorsed by the Socialists. And Olivia Clark, a longtime state government employee who had a background in TriMet, the regional transportation agency as well. So as folks have mentioned, you are seeing a really big cross-section of experience, of perspective, of background represented in each of the city council districts, and those are our 12 city councilors. Next slide. So before the elections, there were a lot of questions about the changes made to the form of government, to the election. There were questions and doubts thrown about the efficacy, the untested nature of how this would all pan out. Naysayers were concerned that it would be too much, it would be too confusing, that voters would throw their hands up in frustration and be unable to make sense of how to navigate the new system. I think my role here tonight is to tell you unequivocally that those concerns were not founded or realized. What we saw instead is that by every metric and every election expert, it was a success. Voters were thoroughly enfranchised, and the undervote and error rates were well within the normal range. That doesn't mean the work's done. Where there were disproportionately disproportionalities previously in the system, there remains work to reach voters, to educate folks, and to engage them into why local government impacts their lives. What you're seeing on the slide is that while the past election saw decreases across the board, that Portland, there was this narrative that Portland's changes led to suppressed voter turnout. And what instead we're seeing is, compared to the state, compared to the neighboring counties, the undervote was well within the turnout range for what we saw. And if anything, Portland saw a slightly higher level of engagement than neighboring jurisdictions, which could likely be credited to the opportunity for enfranchisement offered by the charter changes. Next slide. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but you'll have a chance to see them tomorrow as well. When we did some of our post-election polling, what we found is that nearly 90% of voters felt confident filling out their ballot, which assuades any concerns about mass voter confusion and folks not understanding the system and the options presented to them. Next slide. And then when we compared the previous form of government election to the current system, we saw again overwhelmingly that folks liked electing the mayor through ranked choice voting, as well as 3 city councilors from each district, preferring that vastly to the former system. Next slide. So tomorrow, folks already mentioned Moon. Moon and Chris are going to be presenting about their research and their ballot analysis on the morning panel. But to tease some of the results for you today, what we saw is that clearly voters of color were able to elect candidates of choice in every district, and that those results led to a level of enfranchisement never before seen in Portland's history. The form of multi-winner districts with single transferable vote led to a proportional set of candidates being elected who represented the broadest swath of Portlanders possible, rather than enabling factions in the districts. And so while roll-off and error rates remained low, we saw all of these successes and all of these promises delivered on in this form of government. Next slide. There's going to be a lot of people at this conference talking to you about what happened and why. I want to uplift 2 points. One, there was a massive voter education effort spearheaded by Portland United for Change, the coalition that championed the charter reform. That effort was funded by the city, as well as foundation grants, including many of the folks in the room. And that work really wouldn't have been possible without those resources and the financial support to realize the community vision. That empowered community voices to make those changes and to reach folks to educate them about what the changes were, how they worked, and why it was important. Next slide. There were also multiple efforts to educate voters about specific candidates. We had, I think, by final count, more than 96 candidates running at the same time. It was very confusing. And so there was a lot of efforts to help folks understand how to navigate their ballot and how to make sense of it. One of them that I want to lift up is the BIPOC-led Portland Voter Guide, which created a unity slate among organizations to promote that slate through digital efforts, through mail and field, to give voters more information on how to sort through all of the candidates on their ballot. Next slide. So after all of that, where did it leave us? One piece from Chris and Moon's ballot analysis was how widely supported the city councilors in each of the districts were. When we look at the 3 councilors elected in each district, we see that 79.6 to 87.3% of voters in every district ranked one of the candidates who won on their ballot. For folks who are unaccustomed to multi-winner districts using ranked choice voting, so me until a few months ago, and most folks everywhere, this takes a little bit of time to digest. But what that means is that without fail, in every single district, around 80 to 87% of voters said, I like this candidate enough to think they should lead, or I trust them enough to list them as someone who could represent me on city council. These numbers are mind-blowing. You can't really overstate the significance of 80 to 87% of voters feeling enfranchised by the result of a local election. And in a time of divisive politics, of factionalism, of deep dissatisfaction about the state of democracy, this is the promise offered by democracy reform. It's what's possible when you empower communities to create forms of election and government that enfranchise them and make their voices heard.